What is going on, guys? It's the Mad Dragon. Bledisloe 2 is just around the corner on the weekend. We get to see a rematch between the Wallabies and the All Blacks. We got to see the first game last week, which as a final scoreline was absolutely a bit of a blowout by the end. If you missed the game, if you missed any of the highlights, you might think New Zealand ran away with that one right from the very start. But there was a lot more nuance to it. But you have to say from 55 minutes onwards, it was pretty much all New Zealand. They absolutely dominated that one. So we're going to be checking out the teams today that have been announced for the game this weekend for Bledisloe 2. Having a run through the players, who we think some good picks, some bad picks, any changes we might have made along the way, and thinking about what might be happening in this game as well as a score prediction. If you enjoy this style of video and you want to see more rugby talk on YouTube, make sure to support the channel by subscribing. It really helps out the smaller channels on YouTube reach the biggest audience that we can do as we build up towards the World Cup. So like I said last week, New Zealand absolutely trouncing this game, winning the Rugby Championship with a really solid performance from them. The scoreboard really harsh against Australia. It might have actually arguably been Australia's best game. The scoreboard doesn't reflect it at all, but the actual play they were actually doing in that game was so much better than we'd seen in some of the other games. But one of the big unfortunate things for this Wallaby side is just not being able to convert territory and possession into points. They just don't seem to be able to do it. Eddie Jones just hasn't found how to unlock that skill with this team. So starting out in this front row, Angus Bell, David Parecki and Fa'ausili. Hopefully I'm still trying to get that guy's name absolutely bang on, but tight head props are a worry for Australia at the minute. Of course, we saw big injuries to Ala Alatoa and Taniela Tupou last week. Big worry concerns now going ahead to this World Cup with tight head props going out. Be a big issue for them. The scrummaging last week felt a little bit stable for the start of the game, but like I said, those injuries kicked in. A couple of players really had to step up in that scrum, but obviously once you lose your two tight head props, that's where New Zealand begin to absolutely exploit you. It'll be interesting to see how they get on this week. In the lock department, Nick Frost goes in alongside of Richie Arnold. They're still trying to mix up their lock department a bit, trying to work out what they want to do in terms of their jumpers. The line-out situation for Australia, not really the best. I mean, the first try that came from New Zealand was off of a 5-metre defensive line-out from the Wallabies that was just so slow getting the ball to Tate McDermott. The poor lad got absolutely clattered by Scott Barrett in there. So, you know, you've got to be able to utilise that set piece better, get that ball out quicker and put pressure onto New Zealand. I've said it on the channel before. I feel like the best way to play against New Zealand is hold on to the ball and actually just apply constant pressure on New Zealand. Too many teams, I think, take their time and try and organise themselves and just sort of play around New Zealand. I think New Zealand deal with it so well. Their defence is so good. We got to see it last week, how well they defended their own 5-metre line. You've really just got to be super aggressive. It seems to be the only way to try and catch New Zealand off guard. If you give them time to organise, it really ends up coming back to bite you. In the back row this week, Tom Hooper stays in, who actually had a much better game last week. Fraser McWright takes the open side flanker, and Rob Valentini getting over for a try. A better game from him as well. Did say in the preview video last week about the number of carries. Rob Valentini not even in the top 10. And last week, far more better in terms of getting his hands on the ball and carrying it up. Got himself a try in that game. Tom Hooper as well, you know, had that first game, got taken off after half hour on his debut. Poor lad, you know, just wasn't impressing at all. I assume Eddie Jones has said to him, step up now or, you know, don't come back sort of deal. So he stepped up last week. I thought he had a much improved game against New Zealand last week. But again, that scoreboard for Australia just really hard to look at and feel like you can give all these huge positives to them because they just couldn't get over that scoreboard enough times. In the halfback partnership, Tate McDermott goes in alongside of Carter Gordon once again. Tate McDermott taking the captaincy for this one as well, which I can't remember who was captain last week. Actually, I didn't look at it. I think Alan Alatoa was captain last week before his injury. So Tate McDermott taking over the captaincy. Carter Gordon in at 10. I have to say, I actually think I preferred Carter Gordon playing 13 when Len Ikitau went out. I feel like he was everywhere and making an absolute nuisance of himself. Last week, seeing him just play as that, you know, sort of 10 role, I don't think he got to be, you know, shown off quite as much as we got to see when he played 13 against Argentina, but we'll see how he gets on. In the centre partnership, Samu Kerevi goes back in alongside Jordan Petaia, who last week, defensively, a little bit lacking for me. Jordan Petaia, a lot of slipping off of tackles or just losing big meters in tackles. I'd be looking to hopefully see a bit of an improvement disappointment from him this week in terms of the defensive line. Ikitau, such a valuable reader of the game for Australia. To be missing him at this point, it seems to be a bit of a chink in the armour in that outside centre, which I'm sure New Zealand will want to exploit. And then in that back three, no changes here. Betty got his yellow card last week. He'll have to keep on his good side this time. Marky Mark on the right wing, and finally Andrew Kellaway in that fullback position again. Now Kanita Wase is one of the shining stars of this Australian team. Still low on caps, but every game I see him in, his name is everywhere. He's making meters. He's making a nuisance of himself. He's getting the tackles in. I still think, sort of like Jordan Bataille, he's losing meters in the tackles. But at least he's actually committing the tackles, and he is getting the man down when he has the opportunity to. But as an attacking threat, he is doing extremely well. Betty, of course, getting his yellow card last week. Which I'm always surprised he doesn't get more yellow cards. I feel like even the way he tackles is very aggressive. But so, like I said last week, the backs for Australia look a little bit more, I feel more confident in this back set for Australia than maybe some of the forwards. A lot of chopping and changing. Eddie Jones is still obviously trying to find this team as we lead towards this World Cup. And they don't have a great deal of time to actually do it, because they've got this game against New Zealand this weekend, and then they're playing one game against France right at the end of August. And then it's the World Cup. 2 games left to try and land all these pieces into the correct place. Really, really tough ask for them. In terms of the reserves then, Jordan Ulysses goes in alongside of James Slipper and Nongor. Hopefully I'm going to get that pronunciation right. I don't actually think I've heard his name said out loud yet. I'll have to wait till we get the game. I actually get to hear some correct pronunciation from some of the commentators. Will Skelton and Rob Leota will be finishing off this forwards pack. So again, going for the 5-3. I feel like in that 50 minutes onwards, it really felt like the game began to crumble for Australia, and New Zealand were just making the most of it. Forwards were tired from a number of carries and also having to make so many tackles against New Zealand. Maybe a 6-2 would have been a different route to have gone down here, but they've obviously thought, we need to get as much practice in for some of our backs as possible. So Nick White and Quade Cooper, the replacement halfback partnership, we'll see how they get on. To be honest, I didn't feel like the game shifted, really, having seen Nick White and Quade Cooper come on last week. I would have maybe just even liked to see Tate McDermott and Carter Gordon stay on for the rest of the game. I really didn't feel like I saw any enhancement from the bench when they came on, considering they're 2 very experienced players. And then finally, Isaiah Parise will be coming on in that second half as well. So across the board, it's still a good Australia team. There's a lot of big names in here. This is still a big Australia team, but with such a big loss to New Zealand last week, it's going to be extremely hard for them to bounce back against this All Black side. Speaking of which, we'll talk about this New Zealand team that's been announced. New Zealand are really beginning to feel to me, what's a good sort of analogy? They're sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, right? Over the last sort of couple of years, you feel like they've had some big losses to, Ireland and France, and it felt like they were trying to rebuild it. It's like you've opened a jigsaw puzzle. They've started out, they've been working on that sort of edge. They've been getting all those little pieces correct. A couple of things haven't gone quite right. They haven't quite got it where they needed to. And then over this Rugby Championship, they've been filling in a few more pieces. Not every piece is matching up. They've got a couple of joining pieces. And then last week, it really felt like, they're getting all of them where they want to be now. Players are stepping up. Shannon Frizzell's landing that blindside flanker there. Geordie Barrett at 12. Bowden Barrett 15. Mo'unga, triple axis is working really well. Will Jordan on the wing, but being used like a secondary fullback in the game. So many of these different areas are really beginning to get into place for New Zealand just in time for the World Cup, which is fantastic to see, because they're becoming a really, really big threat for this World Cup. I think they've actually moved now as well to the bookies' first choice for winning it over France now. So very, very exciting stuff for them. So going into this one, number of changes to the team as expected. I did say in the last preview video that game was for the Rugby Championship. I expected a monster New Zealand team for that one. But this one, as a Rugby World Cup warm-up game, it was more likely we were going to see a lot of big changes, lower cap players coming in, maybe some debutants, and they mix it up leading towards the World Cup. That game is one game. This game is another game for 2 totally different reasons, even though, of course, they're part of this Bledisloe Cup that's been going on. So in the front row then, Tamaiti Williams gets a start alongside of Taukiaho and Napu Laulala. Now, Tamaiti Williams was very impressive going up against that Springbok side. I was a bit sad to not see him against Australia last week. I imagined he would be in this game because he's still a young lad. He made his debut. Get him on again. He seems like an absolute unit. I'm really looking forward to see what he can bring to this one. And Taukiaho, You know, that man scoring tries from the back of a maul or just running. He's a pacey little hooker, so I can absolutely imagine him scoring some tries along the way. In the lock department, Brodie Retallick and Sam Whitelock in the lock department. So yeah, this is exactly what I expected to see. I said last week, a lot of people were unhappy. Sam Whitelock not started in, and I was saying in that video, I think it's going to be a case of he's not going to start this week. He'll come on in that second half, get a bit of game time, start the second game. Exactly what we expect. Big line-out threats in there. And, you know, the Australian line-out still not necessarily the most capped in the lock department. These two lads will be trying to make a nuisance of themselves all day long. In the back row, Finau making his debut in the blindside flanker. Sam Cane back as captain in open side. Really nice to see his name because picking up that injury, I think it was a neck injury he had, right? So nice to see him back in this squad, and he will be fit getting into that World Cup. And then in that number 8 shirt, Ardy Sarve. You know, Shannon Frizzell for me has landed that blindside flanker. Absolutely, I think it's worth giving someone else a shot. Who's going to come in secondary under you? Give Finau a go and see how he gets on. In the halfback partnership, mixing it up here, Finlay Christie and Damien McKenzie getting in. Now, Damien McKenzie's kicking in the first game of the Rugby Championship. Not necessarily as good as we've seen him in the past. I did like his overall general play in terms of around the park. He hasn't played a lot of time across the Rugby Championship. And Richie Mwanga has been landing that 10 shirt. So I'm looking forward to see how he mixes it up going into this game. In the centre partnership, Anton Linnett-Brown alongside of Braden Ennor. So this is we've seen Geordie Barrett and Rieko Ioane. You know what they bring. That's your first choice to me. I think this is nice to mix it up here. Braden Ennor's an incredibly fast player. Anton Linnett-Brown's not only going to carry the ball hard, he's also got some cheeky little kicks in him as well. So, I think that's a nice mix up there as well, just to shake up the team. And then finally, in this back three, Lester Fainga'a-Anuku goes in alongside of Sean Stevenson and Will Jordan. Now, Sean Stevenson was one of the big names so many people talking about. Why is he not in this New Zealand team? Why is he not starting? Get him in this game. Been playing an absolute blinder for the Chiefs in the Super Rugby, not getting a start. A lot of people were very unhappy. Interesting to see here, they've gone for Will Jordan at fullback and Sean Stevenson out on the wing. Now, I know both of them can play both. I've seen the highlights and stuff. For me, Sean Stevenson's made a massive impact when he's played fullback and playing alongside Damien McKenzie as well, right? They both play at the Chiefs. I would have thought it would have been better to have had Sean Stevenson play 15 and Damien McKenzie at 10, and they could have worked together like they do at the Chiefs. And then Will Jordan's been playing that wing, but playing the secondary fullback role. So maybe that's how I would have liked to see that shift up. Maybe what they're planning is Will Jordan's already, an absolutely established international fullback. Maybe they're going to try and do the same thing with Sean Stevenson, what they did with Will Jordan. He's playing on the wing, use him like a secondary fullback, and that way you get the best of both worlds. But also if Will Jordan picks up an injury, in the World Cup or what have you have someone to actually replace him there. So really looking like a very, very nasty attacking set of backs. I feel like this one might turn into a bit of a tri-fest this weekend. I'm not entirely sure, the points difference for both teams, but I feel like these backs are absolutely willing of scoring some big points. In the replacements then, Dane Cole's offer Tuanga Fassi and Fletcher Newell as the replacement front row, Tupou Vai and Luke Jacobson coming on as the replacement forwards. Now Luke Jacobson's someone I do want to see a little bit more from. It's the name that's sort of floated around for me. He can make a big impact in a game, but I'd like to see him have some really nice, decent time on the pitch in this one. And then the replacement backs, Aaron Smith, Richie Mwanga, and Dallas McLeod will hopefully be making his debut in this game. So Aaron Smith and Richie Mwanga there. Nice to have your bolsters. How do you want to bring them on? May not even play, depending on how the game's going. If you're already 40 points clear at some point, it's very likely just to avoid the injuries. They could even miss out on this game. Maybe they'll be using this to test the waters a bit with Richie Mwanga. Do you bring him on at 10 and move McKenzie to fullback? Do you bring Richie Mwanga on directly for him? Do you move McKenzie to a wing, take Sean Stevenson, put him at fullback? So certainly a lot of exciting different angles that New Zealand could go down for this one. So what do we think in terms of a score prediction for this one? I have to say the New Zealand pack looked so dominant last week. They made a lot of changes. Australia feel like a little bit more consistent. They'll be wanting to try and improve on what they'd already set as some groundwork in the last game. That New Zealand pack to me though looks like a totally different style New Zealand team, especially with Damien McKenzie at the fly half position, Will Jordan moving to fullback. I can see this team utilising the backs far more, trying to find holes in the defence, looping around, trying to create extra men. I feel like this might be a really big ask for an Australian defence that up to now I've not really had a great deal of confidence in. So I'm going to say a New Zealand win. And I'm going to say New Zealand by... Let's go for 12. I'll go for New Zealand by 12. I'll be a bit conservative. I think it could end up being more, but I'll say New Zealand for 12 by now, guys. If you enjoyed this one today, make sure to drop it a like. Unfortunately, I won't get to watch this one, which is kind of annoying. It's on at like 3 a.m. over here in the UK, and my subscription ran out after the Rugby Championship. So if I want to watch this one, I have to pay like 40 UK pounds to watch this game. Plus a 3 a.m. start. I might be catching this one on the highlights, but I hope anyone that is going to be watching this game live gets to enjoy it. I hope you all enjoy this one today, guys. I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.